Chapter 23. Daniel spent the next few days perfecting the mod with Simon's help, while Anna traded messages with Jada, working out how to take down the assembly plant and acquire the prototype. He enjoyed the time programming alongside Simon, finding him far more sophisticated than Carson. Jada had given him full access to the AI, along with the assurance she could make sure Guerrero was unaware of their interactions. Simon communicated with all the agents simultaneously, as if giving each one his undivided attention. Daniel mused that in this way Simon reflected a common view of God, and in this case, God didn't need to tell Guerrero who else he was communicating with. Together, they developed a mod designed to counteract Project Libertas's non-failsafe weapons. It drew inspiration from the same ubiquitous tech that prevented unauthorized devices from tampering with items tagged by their owners. But for their program, the tag was on the person wielding the MMD instead of the object. As Daniel had explained to Anna, once they'd identified the code to manipulate Lazarus particles, they were able to write counter logic to stop the manipulation. They couldn't test it, so they were left to cross their fingers and pray that it did its job in the field. Anna and Daniel contacted Jason in the evenings, taking care never to divulge their plans or their whereabouts to those they knew were listening. Daniel tried to encourage him the best he could, but struggled to find the right words. It hurt his heart to hear the worry in his son's voice and have no way to go to him or promise that everything would turn out all right. He didn't want to lie, but it was challenging not to. The urge to say, "We've got a plan, we'll all be together soon," overwhelmed him sometimes. But he knew that to make a commitment and break it risked an even greater traumatic outcome for Jason. They ended their conversations in prayer, asking for strength and courage to do what was right. And each night, after they finished, Anna appended it with one of her favorite sayings, "We do hard things." Though Daniel had heard her say this many times before, it took on a special meaning these nights, separated from their son. After 3 days, Anna and Daniel found themselves in an early morning transport car headed out of Houston. Jada had chartered it for the pair so they could arrive at the assembly plant first and verify their suspicions. Daniel traced the gaze of his wife as she sat across from him and stared out the windows, watching as the world outside transformed from the clean lines of the city into the rough and wild countryside. Towering buildings interspersed with green grass and walking paths were replaced with inconsistent landscape marked by patches of industrial structures, agriculture, and an alarming amount of unused, dead terrain. "What are we expecting this place to look like?" She turned from the window to face him. "I'm not sure. I've visited MMD plants before, but they were state-of-the-art with all the advances Feeney has developed over the years. This will be quite different." "How many people do you think they'll have there?" "No idea. A typical plant requires a small number of operatives to keep it running. Most of the work is performed by the MMDs, and the code is written in the city, nowhere near the manufacturing. But Project Libertas will certainly have tight security to protect their investment." Daniel considered this. "Will there be soldiers?" "If this is an off-the-books military operation, it will." "Jennifer Zhao is ex-military, right?" "Her file says so, but it's far more likely Project Libertas recruited her and she still works for Redmond, only in a different position. I assume they brought in the men who attacked us in El Paso the same way." That made sense to Daniel. Redmond took her off the official roster to work for her special pet project. "So I believe. Zhao was an associate of Monk's, and we thought she'd left to join him. Now I'm guessing there's some bad blood between them, and that's why Project Libertas used A Better Way as their scapegoat." Daniel muttered, "Hell hath no fury." She shrugged. "Maybe? Who's to say he did the scorning? At any rate, that's at least 3 former soldiers who belong to Project Libertas. I'm working on the assumption that there are more, and some will be stationed at the assembly plant." She paused for a second, then addressed her data lens. "Simon, can you run a query for recent ex-military members without civilian records?" "Of course, Anna." The sudden response from Simon jarred Daniel. While he'd gotten accustomed to partnering with the AI for programming, he found his silent but always present nature unnerving. By the time they arrived at their destination, 5 miles out from the coordinates where they believed the plant to be, Simon had identified 9 potential hits matching Anna's criteria. She had inspected each one, but admitted she couldn't discern much. The important information had been redacted, but that they existed at all lent credibility to her theory that Redmond was recruiting individuals from the military and making them disappear as she repurposed them. Civilian records didn't simply vanish. Their vehicle pulled to a stop and they climbed out, assembling electric cycles with their MMDs. They didn't want the bulky transport car to give away their presence, so Anna had looked up off-road cycle patterns on the net before they left and ensured they had the necessary materials to make them. Sleek and sturdy, the cycles had tough rubberized wheels capable of handling most types of terrain and built-in heating to fight off the chill in the air. They traveled side by side, guided by a map on their data lenses. As the satellite images had shown, the land here supported little growth. Only a few scattered hills shielded them from observation. If anything existed where their tracker had stopped, it would be visible shortly. Proving the point, 10 minutes later the roof of a building appeared over the horizon. Simon highlighted it and told them he estimated the distance to be a little over 3 miles away from their present location. A wave of relief washed over Daniel. The structure's existence validated their core assumption. This relief was short-lived, however, replaced by a new form of anxiety as their task grew more dangerous. How close do we need to be? Close enough to take good pictures for Jada's warrant, but I think we can manage another half-mile before ditching these. They would have to engage their concealment mods soon, and for that, they'd have to be on foot. Daniel winced at the thought of more walking. He'd done a lot of it in the past week, and it was a habit his body hadn't yet adjusted to, especially with the heavy PMC on his back. Minutes later, they pulled to the side of the dusty road and dismounted their cycles, disassembling them and storing the resulting lump of matter among some rocks. They engaged their concealment mods and started the slow hike forward, the cold January air sharpening every sensation and amplifying Daniel's feeling of danger. A watchtower soon rose above the horizon in front of the original building. With the top level of the ladder now fully visible, Daniel zoomed in with his data lens and saw dark slits spaced evenly across a light green wall. Assuming this was an assembly plant, the opening served to release the heat generated from assembling MMDs. Knowing they would be visible if not for their mods, the unnerved feeling from the warehouse returned. He had to ignore his senses screaming at him that he was vulnerable to watching eyes, and instead trust his programming. Once again, experiencing his own mods firsthand proved some achievements were better enjoyed in the abstract, though he noted Anna remained unbothered. Whether this was out of familiarity with the mods or her natural temperament, he wasn't certain. It took them about 45 minutes before they were able to see the main structure in its entirety, at which point it was easily identified as an assembly plant. Its height of 3 stories, telltale venting slats, and clandestine location all told a story convincing enough for a warrant. Someone was assembling something here, and it wasn't registered. Supporting the plant was the watchtower they'd already seen, a handful of smaller structures, and a low fence encircling the buildings. From the facility's limited footprint, Daniel couldn't imagine more than a dozen people living here. Anna halted and held up her hand. I think we can get what Jada needs from here. We should find somewhere we can call her. Again, the phantom voice of Simon spoke into Daniel's ear. An outcropping of rock to your left will provide the best cover. An indicator popped up on his data lens, directing him to the location. Anna reached up and touched her data lens. Thank you, Simon. I'm going to take some images, then let's head to your rocks. After a few seconds, she started moving again, and Daniel trailed after her. Once they were hidden from the eyes of the watchtower, they disengaged their concealment mods. Anna initiated a call to Jada, and as soon as they were connected, she sent her the images. As Daniel understood it, this part was straightforward. If a structure existed where none should be, it was unregistered and illegal. Jada wouldn't have to explain everything they knew to the judge. The MMD agency's jurisdiction included unregistered assembly plants. She'd get her warrant. Jada sounded pleased. These are perfect. I've got a judge waiting to issue the warrant, so we should be heading your way soon. She hesitated. Make sure you stay hidden when we arrive. Guerrero is coming with us. Anna frowned. All right. What was her reaction when you told her about this? She didn't appear interested. As far as she's concerned, the existence of an illegal assembly plant isn't connected to Shaw's case. Maybe she's a good actor, but my gut says she isn't a part of this. Perhaps. Doubtful lines creased on his face, and then smoothed out again. What about Lisa? She'll be there, along with Foster. I've paired them for the time being, and Foster confided to me that she isn't happy about your arrest. It's nice someone's on our side. She isn't the only one. Guerrero's not popular with most of the agents. Even Yang and Ward shared their doubts to me about how Guerrero handled you. They obeyed her orders when Daniel came to the lockup, but they had their misgivings, Carrie in particular. I wonder if they were as taken in by your decoys as they let on. Anna's eyes twinkled and her lips curled into a grin. I've wondered that too. I'll ask him when this is over. Her expression grew serious again. As for the task at hand, Daniel and I are about to move in closer and try to crack their security. I have no doubts he'll do it. Daniel has proven himself quite competent. I'll call you when we leave, but it shouldn't be long. Be careful. We will. After Anna ended the call, she turned to Daniel. You ready for some hacking? He forced a tight smile. As ready as I'll ever be. She reached over and gripped his shoulder, giving him a quick, encouraging pump. It'll be fine, no different than the warehouse. He screwed up his face. A bit different. Stronger protection and swords that can cut my arm off without touching me. I'm trusting Simon to equalize it all out for you. Simon can't bleed. That's what I'm here for. That's less reassuring than it sounds. You're stalling. He was. Taking in a deep breath, he triggered his concealment mod, then stood up and started moving toward the perimeter. If they tried to breach it, an alarm would sound, but they wouldn't have to go that far. Like the warehouse, he only had to be within range of the network. As they moved, he couldn't help but wonder whether the military employed anti-concealment detection. The mod rendering them invisible had been one of Anna's greatest tools over the previous year, and something he had been proud to have created, but the advantage wouldn't last forever. Every MMD innovation with the potential to threaten people immediately prompted research into countermeasures, and the government tended to be ahead of the curve on such things. Still, assembling concealment fields was mostly considered an experimental tech. Not many had been able to make it work in the real world, so more resources were poured into figuring out the basic tech than countering it. They were probably safe. Probably. Pushing these concerns out of his mind, Daniel turned his attention to the watchtower. It stood 2 stories tall, a single room erected atop thin, straight metal legs and a ladder. The simple chain-linked fence in front of it provided no serious deterrent to anyone but the most accidental of trespassers. He suspected the security system itself would have teeth, though. They approached without alarms announcing their presence, and once again Daniel felt relief pass through him. No counter-tech today. He poked the system, reaching out with his data lens. Unsurprisingly, it wasn't as easy to crack as the warehouse had been, and the consequences for trying might be fatal. Any failures would likely alert the soldiers, and subsequent attempts might result in something as severe as automated targeting by flexible emitters. Keeping his hands steady, he went to work, restricting his communication with Simon to text only. Despite the mounting pressure, he retained his focus. This was his domain, and he had the AI to check for mistakes as he issued commands. It took 15 minutes of cautious poking at the network data channel to set up a fake pass-through at a processing farm. He chose one he'd used before and trusted could keep their interception hidden with minimal latency impacts. After this was done, he registered a redirect to send the security system's authentication messages through a custom program, which started by only studying the traffic without interfering, logging calls until he and Simon could work out the protocol. Once they had enough data, he instructed it to intercept a faked preset login and return a successful authentication response, while still allowing other traffic to flow through as normal. Holding his breath, he attempted to establish a connection, letting the air out when he was rewarded with a success message. Glancing at Anna, who had been watching with quiet anticipation, he winked and gestured her the credentials so she could connect as well. She shot him a broad smile. He returned his attention to the network, finding they now had access to the facility's data, including personnel records and a layout of each building. As they'd suspected, the main structure was an assembly plant containing a floor full of manufacturing MMDs, a lab area, storage, and a loading bay. A barracks stood nearby, housing a maximum of 16 people, though the current roster listed 6, 2 technicians and 4 soldiers. Then Daniel noticed 3 additional names attached to another building labeled Lockup. One of them surprised him with recognition. Suzanne Lewis. He didn't have time to process what this meant before Anna motioned her retreat. Pushing the data aside, he focused on following her back to their hiding spot. They had what they needed, and with the pass-through in place, they'd be able to sneak in undetected while Jada had the attention of the soldiers. When they arrived back at the rocks, they turned their concealment mods off to wait. Daniel raised an eyebrow at Anna. Did you see the names in the brig? I did. Lewis being here confirms our suspicion that Project Libertas is making the arrest of a Better Way's leadership. Not Darren Monk, though. Not yet. Why do you think they're stuffing them out here? If Redmond is in charge of all this, you could put them anywhere. Maybe to keep anyone from talking to them, at least while the situation around Shaw is so hot. A smart interviewer might figure things out and bring down the whole ruse. But they can't stay here forever, so I assume they'll move them to a more conventional prison after things cool off. They fell into a brief silence, broken a few minutes later when Jada contacted them to tell them she was on her way. Anna answered and uploaded everything they'd gathered. I'm sending you over the data Daniel got us. The plant has 4 soldiers stationed here, but I don't think you'll have any trouble serving your warrant. That's what I like to hear. There's a wrinkle, though. They have a brig with 3 people in it, including Suzanne Lewis. We haven't looked into the others, but our guess is they're from a Better Way. Jada's tone remained calm, but gained a note of interest. Is Monk there? No, but he wouldn't be if he went to the commune as soon as Project Libertas started picking up his people. Jada let out a resigned sigh. We need to bring ADT in on this. I've been talking with Director Whitaker about the Better Way arrests. She'll jump at the chance to take custody of these folks and maybe even clear them. And we could use the help. The more the merrier. Indeed. We'll be there in 30 minutes or so. They should mobilize fast enough to get there soon after. Jada closed the connection, and as he and Anna settled into wait, Daniel thought about the assembly plant. He'd anticipated something bigger. When they'd discussed a military base, he'd envisioned numerous buildings, sprawling roads, and airstrips. What they'd found was far more manageable. He allowed some tension he'd been unknowingly holding in his muscles to seep out. I must admit, I'm relieved Zhao isn't here. I was worried she might be. Anna flashed him a grin. Worried? I'd like a chance to take her down for good. It seems she's always been running from me. I thought she might be out here, but based on the roster, she isn't. It makes sense. She's too valuable to keep at an out-of-the-way place like this, though I imagine she isn't far. She's probably based in Houston, at least for the moment. Either way, we'll have to pick her up another day. Daniel gave her a sharp look. They hadn't come here for Anna to settle a score. I'm glad she isn't here. We want as little trouble as possible. Get in, get the prototype, and clear our names. Sounds good to me. Anna said this absent-mindedly, and he frowned. Registering his displeasure, she narrowed her eyes and studied his face. After a moment, she leaned forward and grabbed his hand. Daniel, you're right. I'm sorry. This is only about the prototype, and the simpler it is, the better for us. We don't want any unnecessary complications. Exactly. No heroics. We do the job and leave.
Anna's spirit calmed as she and Daniel waited. She had anticipated more security than they'd found, but in retrospect, the bare-bones crew made sense. The assembly plant was in a remote location, and the more resources Redmond poured into it, the more attention it would attract. Daniel was right that it was good Zhao wasn't here, and Anna tried to master her disappointment over the fact. The agency hover car arrived sooner than she'd anticipated, its hum gradually emerging out of the silence. By the time it was overhead, she and Daniel had already triggered their concealment mods and were moving silently toward the assembly plant. They'd made it to within a few hundred feet of the perimeter when Simon connected them to the team's communications channel, which at the moment was receiving a broadcast. Unidentified aircraft, please stop. You are entering into restricted airspace controlled by the U.S. Marine Corps. If you continue, be prepared to be disabled. Good luck with that, Daniel muttered beside her, and she grinned at him. Jada wasted no time in responding. This is Director Jada Davis, head of the Houston Matter Manipulation Agency Office. I am executing warrant 4958230893 issued by Judge Weathers on behalf of the state of Texas. This facility is in violation of the laws of our country and must be shut down immediately. Prepare to surrender your arms. By the time she was finished, the hovercar had reached the perimeter and stopped, floating in place. Simon provided a status update. They have attempted to disable us. I will bring down their disabling field. Anna grinned at Daniel. Simon was using his hack. Though nothing visibly changed, seconds later the vehicle began moving again, passing unhindered over the chain-link fence to land beside the central building. Anna guessed this shocked the soldiers, as they would have expected their security system to prevent any real threats from entering their space. Reaching the fence line, she and Daniel altered their path to move alongside it and find a spot further away from the impending confrontation where they could pass through. A new pre-recorded audio stream began of Jada reading the warrant summary, informing those of the assembly plan of the law they'd broken and that they would need to surrender both the buildings and themselves. Anna switched to a private channel with Daniel. "We're far enough away now. Let's go in." He acknowledged her, then gestured with his bracelets. A section of the fence disappeared, courtesy of his security hack, and they walked through. She continued to move forward, eyes tracing the area in front of her while he put the segment back into place, then turned to trail after her. As she approached the building, she felt vibrations radiating from the activity inside. When she arrived at a metal door, she held up her hand and stopped to listen. Daniel halted beside her and quietly interacted with the security system, after which the vibrations died away. They waited at the door while the recording finished. As soon as it did, a strong male voice responded, directing his ire at Jada and the other agents. "This is a U.S. Marine Corps installation, and we do not answer to civilians." Jada's tone rose to match his. "Incorrect. Our agency's jurisdiction is federal, which includes both this structure and you. You must lay down your weapons and present yourself for arrest." A few moments passed without any words, but Anna knew most of the soldiers' resistance was performative. He had no choice but to respect the warrant, and he did, eventually. "We will comply, but I don't think you'll be happy when this ends up in court. This operation is legal and key to the national safety concerns of the Unified States." "We'll see about that." Jada switched to an agency channel. "Williams, secure these soldiers in the hover car. Yang and Ward, round up the non-combatants. Foster, take custody of the prisoners. We can hand them over to ADTA when they arrive. After we've got everyone secured, we can start our search of the grounds." Anna gestured at the door and whispered to Daniel, "That's our cue." She stepped through it, and he followed behind. They clicked off their concealment mods once they were inside, preserving as much energy as possible. They'd entered a cavernous space where a half-dozen MMDs had been hard at work minutes before, and the resulting heat wrapped around them like an oppressive blanket. The building was tiny compared to a typical Feeney plant, and its machines far bigger. 6 desk-sized MMDs consumed most of its floor space, a paltry number, relatively speaking. A far wall had a sizable door built into it that could open out onto a landing zone for transport cars. Stacks of tablets sat on one side of the door, while drums of raw materials, identical to those from the warehouse, lay across from them. Daniel pointed at one of the round containers. "That's our shipment." He shifted to the MMDs. "Those are all tablets, no weapons. Project Libertas must still be working up to more flexible form factors." She glanced at him. "Do these units have fail-safes?" He paused to run a scan. "Yes, I suspect they have a long way to go until they can mass-produce non-fail-safe MMDs. We should assume Zhao's swords are a one-off assembly." "Good. Let's find the prototype they used on the sheep. We don't have a lot of time." "This way." He headed toward the opposite side of the building, away from the loading dock. "The lab is over here. That's where we need to go." She followed him to a large wooden door set into a wall that served as a partition between the assembly floor and the lab. It was 2 stories tall, with stairs leading up to the second floor. Several glass windows offered a view into the first, but were presently dark and revealed nothing. Daniel disassembled the door and stepped into the room beyond, the lights coming on as he did so. Entering after him, Anna recognized the lab from the vid on Ben Jacob's tablet, though now without the sheep or its blood. She shuddered, remembering how the animal had died. Project Libertas hadn't needed to do something so brutal to prove their non-failsafe MMD was functional, but she supposed brutality was the point. They weren't building it for agriculture. While Daniel connected his data lens to the lab system, Anna scanned the room, noting the protective barrier where the woman had stood operating the prototype. Approaching it, she examined the console the woman had operated, but found nothing of note. The device wasn't here, nor had she expected it to be. She turned to face Daniel. "There's probably some kind of safe." He bobbed his head. "If it's here, they'll keep it somewhere secure." He fell into silence, poring through information while she carried on with her visual inspection, which didn't find much. The room held very little in it, as the researchers would assemble whatever their experimentation demanded, then disassemble it afterward. Anna had just given up her physical investigation as fruitless and connected to the lab system herself when Daniel's excited voice pierced the stillness around them. "I found the charter for Project Libertas. Take a look." He swiped a document to her, and she started reading, astonishment washing over her. Its byline identified President Strickland as the author, and it mandated Project Libertas to develop the technology to manufacture matter manipulation devices independent of any external entity to the Unified States. She shook her head in amazement. "Strickland wrote this." "Yes, which means this lab isn't an overzealous program created by Redmond. Everything in this building is here because Strickland wanted it. If people found out, it's a ticking time bomb." Anna read on, her heart sinking. The charter not only covered MMD assembly, but also research into living matter manipulation. The U.S. government was violating its own mandates against creating MMDs without fail-safes. Anger surged in her veins, and she looked away from the document to stare at Daniel. "All this time, I've been hunting down people abusing MMDs, while the people I work for developed the worst possible violations." Daniel reached out and put a hand on her shoulder, looking deep into her eyes. "Honey, you didn't do this. You aren't them, and their actions don't take away from your work. You've taken bad actors off the street and protected the innocent, while those like Strickland, Redmond, and Shaw sought power. It's not your fault." She looked away, an emptiness growing in the pit of her stomach. "I know I haven't always chosen well. If I had, we might not be fugitives." His voice remained strong and resolute. "Maybe your choices haven't been the best. Maybe mine haven't either. But I know if we weren't here now, we wouldn't be exposing this." Her eyes returned to his, and she inhaled deeply. "You're right, but I can't help but feel like there could have been an easier way, a better way." "Perhaps, but it's the way we took, so we have to see it through." He broke eye contact and pulled his hand away, re-engaging in his information search. "We still need to find that prototype. It will prove everything." She glanced around. "Is there an office, someplace where a safe might be?" Bringing up the map of the building, she noticed a cluster of rooms directly above them. "I'm going to check the second floor." "Okay, I'll keep looking through the system." She exited the lab and made her way upstairs, finding a hallway flanked by offices, each identical to its neighbors. She examined each room as she passed, hoping to see something that looked like a good place to secure items. She peered through the last doorway and finally found what she was looking for: a sealed metallic box with no door or mechanism to open it. She contacted Daniel. "I've got something. I'm going to need you to hack it." "I'll be up in a sec. I hope it's not too difficult. We're running out of time." He was right, and Anna wondered how much longer they had before agents would enter the building. As if to underscore this point, Simon's voice burst from the agency comm channel. "Director, we have an incoming aircraft traveling fast." A rush of adrenaline flooded Anna's body. Project Libertas hadn't respected the warrant after all, and now the political war was about to become physical. But with what she and Daniel had found, it made sense. If evidence of what Redmond's people had done here got out, she would go down hard. Maybe even Strickland, too. Daniel appeared beside her, breathing hard and face filled with anxiety. "This is the safe? Give me a sec." She watched him work, steadfast despite his fear. She admired his focus under pressure, and seconds later a segment of the box vanished. Inside lay the bulky tablet from the vid, its form similar to those in the warehouse. "That's it!" She took a handful of quick pictures to document their discovery, then assembled an evidence bag. Without touching the device, she motioned it inside. Daniel held out his hand. "I'll take that." She passed it over to him, and he stowed it in his backpack. She caught his eye. "We should leave." He nodded grimly. She addressed the AI. "Simon, upload everything we have." Simon didn't respond, and Anna realized their connection had been severed. Whatever was coming was jamming them. She grabbed Daniel's hand and started pulling him back toward the stairs, repeating herself as she went, infusing her voice with a frantic energy. "We need to get out of here, right now!" Eyes enlarged with fear, he yielded as she dragged him along. Then the world exploded around them.